LinkedIn and YouTube, hopefully. Let me just check my... Excellent. All right. Well, welcome to another great edition of Account-Based Friday. And we got a special guest today from ZoomInfo. You might have seen Apparo's name referenced by the CEO of ZoomInfo very recently as one of the two key product leads for the ABX initiative. Super excited to have Apparao join us today. So thank you, Apparao. And we're going to dive into your background in a minute. And it's probably relevant to this week's poll, which you can see here on the screen that I've got up. This week I'm asking, actually we went back in the archives to get a poll, to get a relevant poll for Apparo's background. And this week we had asked a question about intent data and the number of sources of intent data, if people were using intent data, if they were using multiple sources of intent data. And interestingly enough, and we had a lot of votes, this was also at a time when the algorithm of LinkedIn prioritized the voting. We had a heck of a lot of votes here, and not one vote said they were questioning what intent data is. And this was 5 months ago. So that's, potentially a really great sign that people are really starting to see the light. And it looked like there were a number, not only of one adoption, but multiple adoption technologies. But I'm curious, Megan, did you have any reaction to this poll when you saw it?
I have to say I was kind of pleasantly surprised. I don't know if you've got a bit of a self-selecting audience that is more sort of data involved, but I would say more than one was, I was surprised. I would have said one. Or not yet, probably more, but one, I think I would have expected, but not more than one. So I think that's great. And I'm glad, because I also think different sources give you different information. I think the real hard part here is how do you make the best use of it? And how do you make sure that both your sellers and your marketers know what they have and how to take action on it? But other than that, I think this is great news. And Apparao, thank you very, very much for joining us today. We are very excited to have you here. John and I are both probably more excited about data-related topics than most people, but at the same time, I think we've all gotten there. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, curious if you had an opinion on this, Apparao. Certainly your products, you've got a variety of different products at ZoomInfo. You guys are kind of like the 800-pound gorilla, but did you have any opinion on what you saw here in terms of intent data?
I think this is very much in line with what we see in our customer base, and also in general, what I've seen outside, that companies have started using more than one source of intent data to make their decisions. But there's also another layer which conceptually is B2B intent is considered as third party, right? Like when people are researching certain topics on third party properties and all that stuff. From a product concept standpoint, we've been starting to think like when a visitor visits your website, your marketing website, that's a different level of intent, which is a much stronger intent. But if you can categorize your website into different forms of intent, and I think that's something that's new. We are seeing people starting to do, and we're also, me being like a person from a product strategy, product management world, we're also trying to strategize how can we build that as a feature? How can we help marketers mix third-party intent to what intent and behavior their visitors or prospects are showing on their website? And can that be used for beefing up the strength of an intent signal?
Yeah, no, really, really interesting. And, with your unique background, I remember when we first met, it was years ago when you were, I call it the architect, you were the product lead of the Net Prospects Workbench, which for those people who are listening who don't know, it was a terrific way to benchmark data and really see what your data looked like relative to others. Data is kind of the oil and the engine of the whole MarTech stack. Are you seeing any interesting trends or activities maybe related to enabling that stack, or like from your perch of product management in ZoomInfo, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, no, that's a great observation, and that quote never gets old, right? Like data is the oil, right? So I think in the last 15 years or so, the emphasis on data as an important ingredient has become relevant across the board, right? Not just the sales and marketing context. Data in general has become a unique ingredient that can bring business value, right? So I think the emphasis on data value and the context has not changed. I think where things are accelerating more is around, of course, the workbench you talked about was created to provide a holistic one place to go for the marketer to understand what is the current state of my marketing data, right? And how can I keep it at a healthy rate on an ongoing basis? So that's something that's still very useful, heavily used by marketers. And of course, there's a maturity curve on marketers that are more mature in feature adoption. They have the ability to plug in these types of services directly into their CRM system or marketing automation system. So, the cleansing or the enrichment is happening on an ongoing basis, right? But the people that are still, lagging behind in terms of adoption, they try to do it using the CSV files and, file-based, cleansing and things like that, which is still pretty good. The important trend that we are seeing is kind of identifying triggers from these data, right? Like not just managing the data for health, but also using the changes in the data as triggers. Like, for example, Salesforce, not very recently, but probably about a couple of years ago, has launched this feature called change data capture, where you can keep an eye on what data is changing in my Salesforce system. Like, for example, a lead has been updated or an opportunity stage has changed. So I think there is more emphasis now on monitoring data for important changes that can be used as triggers to help notify sales persona or the marketing persona to take some actions based on that. That's an important change. I think data health is considered as table stakes, if you will. We all should do it, but also leveraging data for identifying triggers has become a very big initiative these days.
I think you're on a really interesting point on this idea of data that changes. That's one way to view, I think, intent data versus static profile data. I mean, profiling data changes, and you see those conversations about hygiene and how often people are changing. And if you look at, so we're still talking about hygiene today because there are lots of companies that don't do good hygiene. ZoomInfo has a huge hygiene practice. But now we're talking about data that changes much more rapidly. And so having systems that can adapt to that is one part of the picture. And today, most systems aren't very good at ingesting information about change.
Yep.
The entire industry is not good about actually pricing information about change versus information about profile. You know what I mean when I say that? So if you say that the data buyer, still the legacy data buyer, is buying records, not updates.
Correct.
And so there is a challenge for the vendors in that you need to get paid for the value that you're delivering on the change. And
Correct.
then to your point on the trigger, then, okay, if you can identify triggers, how does the organization prepare to act on the trigger is the next piece. I saw a fascinating presentation by Barry Vasudevan at Forrester on enablement of all the players in the value chain of the go-to-market and how little enablement there is on insight to the various players. And it really spoke to me about, wow, you can have the best data in the world, but if the organization is not enabled to act on it, you can't get the value you want. So I think that CMOs, well, maybe CMOs, it's certainly, this is not something CROs think so much about, but the RevOps community has to really start thinking about who needs to be enabled with this change, and how do we articulate what the change is and how much preparation to act on the change is necessary to get to the value.
Yeah, no, John, I think that is spot on. In fact, one of the things that we've noticed is, again, as a guy who's wearing a product hat, I always keep thinking about how do we make it easy for the marketers or the sales persona to take actions on this, right? And what we've noticed is, you can highlight the changes in the products and various services we deliver, but what if we could make taking that action an automated process, right? So we've all seen the traditional marketing automation where you say, when I get a lead from one of my forms, enroll them into this marketing campaign. If they open this email, then push them into this other path where they get invited to a webinar. So we've had that type of an automation in the traditional marketing automation tools. Now, I'm also seeing a trend where there is go-to-market automation, which is potentially driven by these types of data triggers. Like, for example, if there is a visitor on my website from this company, because with the visitor intelligence product lines these days, you can find that out. Like saying you will know that because of the IP address and other resolution. If somebody visits from this website, then update that if this is an active opportunity in my Salesforce, update the fact that people from this opportunity are actually visiting your website, and maybe if the frequency is too high, alert the sales rep, right? So using those triggers in a way to automatically take actions or automatically send notifications in real time, right? So those are some new, I think, product trends that I'm seeing where the actionability on these triggers can be, number one, automated, or number two, delivered in real time to the persona that needs it, right? Whether it is in Salesforce or Marketo or Slack or anywhere that's necessary.
Yeah. So where I was going is, okay, what actions is marketing historically good at? What actions does sales focus on? And do the reality of those actions, or the ability to act, actually have space to take the actions that we might want to take on these many signals? We say it a different way. Yeah. I would say, despite all the spamming that marketing is doing, it's really not that much relevant communication. It's not action being taken on signal.
Yeah.
And then sales is very, very focused on actions that they can take in the presence of an opportunity.
Yeah.
So then when we apply this to ABM and we add a lot more signals, how can we prepare our organizations to take relevant actions around these signals that are not necessarily in the presence of an opportunity, nor are they ones that are easy for marketing to take? So we have the potential for more action. How do we take, what is the right action, and how do we take it?
Right.
I don't know the answer. I think it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, I've seen, and this is something that our product marketing team has done. We have published this thing called as a pipeline playbook, essentially doing that, saying, what are the potential actions sales and marketing leaders can take based on these signals? And I think we've come up with 100 pipeline plays recommended. I'm also considering, what is the value in, or would it be valuable for us to productize some of those, like you mentioned? What if the data and the change triggers can be combined with potentially suggested plays in this context, right? So I think, John, I've seen attempts like this. This one is specifically from ZoomInfo, being made to package this up as, and John's been a B2B marketing in the world for a while. He's done a lot of great consulting engagements. So I think it's a great opportunity for the B2B thought leaders to come in and say, hey, if there are hundreds of signals available, different formats, different sources, different contexts, what could you do to move the deal ahead in that, right? So I think this is an open opportunity for a lot of people to come up with potentially their own playbooks.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, that's where we've seen Conversica really working hard on it still.
Yeah, it's definitely a gap in a way where at least what we see is you get all these great signals on the sales side. You have to digest that information, BDR, SDR, and they're typically more junior. And so the challenge that we see there is you've got to assimilate, and the analogy that I've used is you're taking that sales organization, you're changing them from a beat street cop to a private detective. And in a private detective model, you've got to assimilate all these different signals into that play. I really like Apparo's idea of maybe productizing the plays, because on the sales side, going from that beat street cop to private detective is really, really challenging for a junior SDR or a new SDR who's got to, quickly contact people. And if they're lucky getting through on the phone, they've got 20 seconds to articulate their value proposition and assimilate all those signals at the same time. So it's a very challenging, very, very challenging area to go after.
Yeah.
I don't think so. If you think about the explosion in SDR, in the SDR role, I don't think that's the solution in the ABM motion. I think this, 1 year as an SDR and then you move into something else is going to evolve more. I think we might see, for the ABM motion, we might see the development of an ISR role that is much more nuanced. I mean, to the point that you're making, I guess, you could simplify things and be very prescriptive to the SDR thing, but the other way to go is to be more sophisticated about the capabilities of the inside rep.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point, John. And I'm going through a sales cycle myself right now, and what I found so interesting is the company that relied on a BDR to be the first point of engagement actually significantly reduced the value and the impact of that journey. Given sort of the kind of project I was looking to embark on in the role that I have, every other company, I got a phone call from the CEO, or I got an email from the CEO within an hour of outreach, maybe less in some cases. In that one case, it really stood out for having somebody more junior who hadn't done homework on who I was, what I needed. I'd offered a fair amount of information when I did the outreach, and they could have done a little bit of homework to come back, and others did, but they were more senior, right? They kind of understood how to bring those signals together, how to leverage the data, and then use that to have that first interaction really be meaningful. And, it didn't mean that the company's not still in the mix. It's just, they stood out for that. And it reminds me that in many cases, if that is the first impression of your brand, right? Somebody who isn't able to bring those signals together and tell that story and respond to the things that they're hearing, or at the very least, pass them on to the next person you're going to talk to, which also didn't happen in this case. It's not a very effective model, and it falls apart really quickly in a world where, the better kind of engagement and the higher quality engagement wins. To your point about too much spam, not enough value, John, right? So Apparao, I'd be very curious to hear from you. I think product folks are always in a really great position to know what the best users of your product are doing. What would you say are a few things that really set apart the companies that make better use of the data, that don't create an experience like the one that I just had? Like, what would you say are some of the hallmarks of great?
Yeah, no, I definitely, we love to talk to customers like that too, because they tend to leverage all the functionality that's being built in the expected way, and sometimes they even push the envelope. They kind of ask for more, so it's always good to talk to people like that. So when we, any ABX product, right, I think the expectation is that there is an end-to-end flow that needs to be adopted, if you will. So for that adoption, there is certain baseline setup that's required, right? Like some initial investment in terms of setup, right? Like, for example, if you want to use third-party B2B intent, you have to make sure that you're setting up the right intent topics, right? You are setting up the right integrations into your marketing automation, sales engagement platform, or marketing automation platform, so that when we have to push activities or data from one system to another system and orchestrate it, it becomes actually possible. So in your example, if the fact that BDR had a call with you is available as an event that happened in that journey, and if there are processes in place to say that needs to be highlighted elsewhere, let's say for an executive dashboard or an executive system, it would have been very clear for people to know that the engagement needs to change, move to a different level, right? So that's the second part, which is making sure that you not only invest in your initial setup, but also you invest in the integrations across the board. And I think a lot of times marketers and even operations folks find it difficult because the ownership is in a different place. Like they have to kind of like convince other stakeholders that are not potentially within their control, right? So once this is done, being able to like orchestrate a flow where you're saying there is this basic firmographic data, and then there is this data around technographics and scoops about, let's say, executive changes and all those things, plus third-party intent, plus all the data changes that are happening in my CRM marketing automation, all of that combined into creating like these things we call as marketing audience or marketing lists, right? And then overlaying that with your website visitor information, who is visiting, which particular location of this company is visiting and why, and combining that with another area which is also very prominent within the ABX world is the buying committee, if you will, right? Of course, we want to start with the account, but we always have to depend. We sell to people, right? People make the buying decision. So combining buying committee and using this flow, like identifying accounts, account prioritization, the buying committee, and creating audiences based on that, and deploying campaigns, right? Most of the ABX platforms today support display ads, social ads, pushing out either native or external email campaigns, and other types of engagement mechanisms, right? And creating that loop in a way to retarget after that. Let's say people that have clicked on my ad, they landed on the landing page but never converted. So I need to understand who that is, or have a small dynamic cohort or an audience group that tracks everybody that clicked on the ad but never converted, right? That's came so close, but we just couldn't. So maybe another push, right? So I see these days a number of products, including ZoomInfo, can all facilitate these types of dynamic cohorting and being able to continue that loop until they actually, let's say, come on a website and have a chat engagement. Like, these days, chat conversion is very important for B2B websites, as well as, let's say, form-based conversion. And then ultimately, the final thing that I've seen most of the really, best of the breed customers do is use this meeting acceleration to cut down at least 2 to 3 days of back and forth in terms of when a prospect expresses interest in something, like through a form submission or a chat, to when that first meeting is set up by an SDR, right? Imagine if you use a meeting acceleration tool where the prospect can see that, hey, thank you for submitting this form. By the way, if you want to talk to somebody at my company, here are 4 available slots. Pick one, right? And then that meeting is directly on the SDR's calendar, next available. The meeting happens frictionless, right? At least the setup of the meeting is so frictionless. So these are the marketers that are having this end-to-end flow in mind with a goal of like, okay, my goal is to generate a number of SDR meetings this quarter or this month, or my goal is to get a certain number of form submissions or chat conversations. I think they're able to see that it is a flow, but it also is a circular flow and you have to connect these dots to be able to do it. Like, for example, the key takeaway here is this dynamic audience, right? Being able to build audience based on all these cohorts. And some of these things will become eventually laborious to do, that you can't do this at that level of granularity. That's where I think some of the product features we're building, saying predefined audiences based on visitor behavior or prospect behavior, is also. Some of these concepts, by the way, are very prevalent in B2C marketing already at larger scales. I think adopting some of those into the ABM, ABX flows will make our customers more successful. And like I said, and you mentioned, only a few marketers are able to think through with that level of clarity and get through that implementation. The ones that do that are really successful.
So I think it's interesting. You gave an answer that, in a sense, I'm going to tease you a little bit, that I think was very product oriented.
Yep.
you know, and it had elements that, well, how can I scale this? They're very important when you think from a product perspective. But what I heard in what the story Megan was telling was that, and I think they're connected in upfront planning. What is your exception handling capability? So do we think fundamentally that a BDR interaction with a CMO is a good idea in an ABX motion? Or is that the exception would be, if you've got an inquiry from this level, you have to have a different interaction as your motion.
Yep. So
when you've got a CMO, you don't have your most junior person, even though it's obvious that junior person is going to try to set up a meeting. You can skip that meeting if you have a qualified executive make the call and immediately serve the need. So in a way, it's more like a customer success kind of interaction if the trigger tells you that. And you'd have to plan for that up front, because basically the majority of your inquiries are not going to come from senior executives. So you build a process to handle those, as much about disqualification as qualification. But when you have this exception, how can you adjust to it? It's not clear. So in building in a scalable system, I still think for an ABX motion, you have to think hard about exception handling to deliver improved customer experience when necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I agree what you're saying, John. And I was trying to generalize that it's not just exception handling, but it's scenario handling.
Yeah.
The exception scenarios, there could be different types of scenarios, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the point about scale, though, is important, because, I mean, we all know the first thing that people ask for is, I want to be able to do this, and I want to be able to do it at scale. I want to be able to have perfectly customized, data-informed conversations with every prospect, and I want to be able to do it at scale. It's, I think, but Apparao, you bring up an important point, which is some of those things that have been possible in B2C at tremendous scale are now becoming possible in B2B. But I'd love if we can go over for a second to ask kind of a last question on, with that in mind, though, how is data privacy regulation impacting what you're able to provide to customers and the things that they're able to use the data for? Just as we start to think about that more B2C-like world.
Yeah. No, I think, data privacy is no longer optional, right? It has to be built in all of our go-to-marketing strategies and how we handle data, both the data that we are collecting as a first party or data that we are acquiring from other third parties, right? So I think what happened was there is more due diligence that is required now to be able to use data that is being collected as compared to before. So I think as far as those things are in place to do that due diligence and to make sure that, like I said, data privacy adherence is no longer an optional thing, right? As long as everything is compliant, it goes forward, right? So as a part of that process, I think we are usually in a better spot in terms of the data we're using for these purposes, because we know that there is clear buyer intent, right? I mean, maybe the compliance is actually helping us reduce the spam, right? So, instead of like having the liberty to send it to anybody and everybody, now this is actually indirectly helping us to focus on the audience that are really in the market to buy your product, as opposed to just kind of generally anybody that's out there. So I think it has we do more due diligence now than before, but I think overall it has helped both the marketing communities as well as the consumer communities to kind of make it more relevant.
Awesome. Well, just keeping an eye on time here. I think we could ask questions all day. I wanted to maybe ask you one closing question. In terms of the recent announcement with your CEO saying you were one of the 2 product leads that rolled out the ABX product at ZoomInfo, you talked a little bit about the MarTech optimization and the efficiency there. knowing the trajectory of where Zoom has come from, of acquiring DiscoverOrg, Ringlead, I'm sure there are other companies as well. What prompted the ABX kind of initiative or the ABM thought process at Zoom, and what are you hoping to accomplish there, just out of curiosity, just to kind of close things out?
Yeah. So, John, I mean, we've been selling to marketers forever, right? This is not like, we're creating a brand new product for the marketers. I think it's more about packaging some of the acquisitions that we have done in the recent past. I don't know if you remember, we've also acquired a company called Clickagy that does intent data in the past. So this is more about packaging a number of different offerings that we have in a way that makes it so much easier for marketers to kind of execute on the ABM, ABX use cases, right? Like I said, like, since you asked this in the context of ZoomInfo, like straight from the powerful data assets that ZoomInfo has, plus the B2B intent data that we've been getting from Clickagy and other sources, the one we acquired, plus the solid CRM data orchestration capabilities we have from Ringlead, and the visitor intelligence product that we've always had natively, and the form enrichment product. We've also acquired this company called Incent that does chatbot, that as a conversion tool, plus a bunch of other capabilities are all brought together to enable this end-to-end flow. We want to make it so easy for a CMO like Megan to invest into this ABM platform from ZoomInfo that brings all of this kind of sequences together, right? So that it becomes, and then finally, we also want to focus on the sales and marketing alignment, right? So historically, there has always been this battle between the sales leader and the marketing leader in terms of data investments, right? Sales leaders want to invest in prospecting tools, marketing leaders want to invest in data and data management tools. So now with Marketing OS and Sales OS from ZoomInfo, we are creating this synergy where the sales leader can get what they want, the marketing leader can get what they want, and we're creating bridges in between these two that will deliver what we're calling a sales and marketing alignment, which will be, I think, only possible if we package our product like this. So that's one of the reasons. We think this will put the GTM teams in a great position to leverage the functionality, get features and data specific to their needs, but also kind of collaborate very seamlessly. That's the whole reason behind making this ABM as a separate offering. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Apparao, for coming out this morning. This has been a great conversation, and added bonus with John coming in too. We weren't anticipating him coming in, so great dialogue. And Megan, any closing thoughts or for next week or?
No, just a big thank you to Apparao for now, and we're delighted you could join us today. And thank you so much for sharing such valuable information for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Megan, John. It was a pleasure, and it's always great to talk to you guys.
Awesome. And next week we've got Megan. One of your guests is joining us, Adrian Chang.
Yes, and he's going to be speaking from kind of a combined marketing and customer success perspective. He's got a great background